All right. So as I mentioned, for this week, we are presenting Self-Instruct, aligning language models with self-generated instructions. So Akash had mentioned this briefly, I think, in his presentation um, a few weeks ago on Laura, I think, or Pef, one of them. Essentially, the way what this is doing is it's just allowing you to create your own data set for kind of aligning the model. So it takes a small sample of human generated examples, and then has a pretty efficient way of generating similar types of questions and answers that are still aligned with whatever task or goal you're trying to create them for. So Self-Instruct is a framework for improving the instruction following capabilities of pre-trained language models by bootstrapping off of its own generations. Pipeline generates instruction, input, and output samples from the model, and then actively prunes them before using them to fine-tune the original model. And applying the method to vanilla GPT-3, they demonstrated 33% absolute improvement over the original model on supernatural instructions, which is on par with performance of Instruct GPT, which is trained with private human user data and human annotations. So yeah, that's the main takeaway, honestly, is just, can we get to kind of human level instruction tuning for these models without actually going through the entire process of human annotation? And can you get this model to create such a data set for you so that you can build a model that's on par without all of the human annotations. Cool. So the current largest human instruction data sets include prompt source and supernatural instructions that use extensive manual annotation for collecting instructions to construct T0 and TK instruct. And Self-Instruct is the semi-automated process for instruction tuning, a pre-trained language model using instruction signals from the model itself. So the concept, as I said, is like that's the entire thing, is how do you just get it to take the seed set of like 175 examples and use that to generate like a good data set. So they play around with things such as trying to ensure that each of the examples are unique enough, as well as still like unique, but like within the constraints of it still making sense. So I think they do something like they just compute the Rouge score or something. One sec, let me double check. I think it's later on in the slides. Yeah, so they do the Rouge L score to kind of ensure that the samples that they're generating are unique enough from the existing sample set. So yeah, so this is a kind of a diagram of how it works overall. They distinguish it between two different types of tasks. So there's the input first versus output first, and they do that to distinguish between classification or non-classification tasks. So here, as you can see, there is the first 175 seed tasks with one instruction and one instance per task. And they put all of that into this pool of tasks, right? And then it generates an instruction. This is all generated by the language model. And then the language model tries to figure out if this is going to be a classification or a non-classification task. And then based off of that, it determines if it should first come up with the output or what the input for that instruction is. It's a bit confusing, I'd say, but if you look at the example, here it says, find out if the given text is in favor of or against abortion. So it first says, okay, it comes up with the label of pro-abortion and then tries to generate an input of pro-abortion text. Whereas here, when it's not a classification task, it does it input first. So give me a quote from a famous person on this topic. And it says the topic, which is importance of being honest. And then based off of that, it's generating the output. Yeah, just something they found to be more useful for kind of distinguishing between these tasks.
Do you mind if I ask a question, if that's okay?
Yeah, obviously.
Awesome. So I just wanted to understand and distinguish two potential cases. So one scenario is that they would use a specific language model to generate fake data set, and then feed that fake data set into a second but distinct language model for fine tuning. And a second scenario is where you have the exact same language model that you use to generate the data and then fine tune on the same data. Which one is happening here? If I've explained that correctly, appropriately.
Say that one more time. So you're saying, are they actually fine tuning on the data set created through this process, or?
Oh, I'm saying, are they fine tuning on the data set that was generated from the same model that generated the data?
So this right now, this process is not actually training or fine tuning anything. They're taking a vanilla language, like just GPT-3, not like instruction, not chat GPT, not, the instruct GPT model. They're just taking a basic vanilla language model and just prompting it to like do this, right? So given this task, they're getting it to generate instructions, doing this basic classification, and then like this, there's no, and then there's just filtering. There's no training. This is not a training loop here.
Okay, so this is just to generate the data.
Yeah, this is just to generate this data set mentioned. So given these examples, they're just going through this to create a data set that they can then use to kind of take this. Yeah, so once the data set is generated, then they're putting that on top of GPT-3 to see how good it is at following instructions, comparable to like Instruct GPT.
Awesome, thanks very much.
Yeah, so this entire paper is honestly just how can you. It's pretty important actually. Like it's a pretty big bottleneck if you need to get human annotations to align models, right? So this is really saying you can just use like this or their approach or some other approach on letting the model itself generate kind of very high quality instruction, like alignment data essentially, and then use that, and they're able to show pretty strong results as compared to like human generated instruction alignment data.
And is the end goal of this to use this generated data set to fine tune another model, or?
Yeah, the goal of this is to generate a data set that will allow you to take vanilla language models and turn them into instruction fine-tuned language models.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's the entire goal of this paper, and they're just trying to figure out what's the best way to set that up.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool. All right. So yeah, as I said, the method is to evaluate the model on GPT-3, which is a vanilla language model. They iterate self-instruct on this model, leads to 52,000 instructions paired with about 82,000 instance inputs and target outputs. So as I mentioned, this is just instruction. For each instruction, they generate a few different yeah, to be honest, I don't know how great this diagrams example is, because give me a quote from a famous topic, from a famous person on this topic, is yeah, very close to nothing to do with the first instruction and class label. But the main goal is, yeah, they just use this process to create a lot of instructions, and about 1 to 2 instances for each of those instructions for inputs and target output. And then this data provides a diverse range of creative tasks. Over 50% have less than 0.3 Rouge L overlap with the seed instructions. So this essentially means it's not like recreating the same thing paraphrased in different ways. They kind of try to ensure that it's covering a large breadth of tasks. because I don't know if you all have seen, but there's some other papers recently about if you can just recreate the performance of high performing like instruction tuned models just by taking a lot of their examples and using that to fine tune the smaller model. But I think a lot of the limitations they found in that was that it it would be good at those few kinds of instruction tasks that it was given, but it does not generalize well. So I think one thing this paper kind of focuses on a lot is how to avoid that issue, right? So is it actually being quote unquote creative and covering a large breadth of these different tasks, or is it just repetitively going after the same task all the time? So yeah, GPT-3 Self-Instruct, they create this model by fine-tuning GPT-3 on this data set that they've created. And it shows a broad range of instruction following capability, outperforming models trained on other publicly available instruction data sets and leaving a 5% gap behind Instruct GPT. Yeah, and I said the way they actually prune it is not very fancy. It's really just that they are getting rid of any examples that have kind of more than 0.7 overlap, but with the seed instructions. So that's kind of how they filter through it. So they define the instruction data. The instruction data to generate contains a set of instructions, IFT, each of which defines a task T in natural language. Each task has one or more input-output instances. So these are those kind of examples that were provided at the top. And a model M is expected to produce the output Y given the task instruction I and the instance output X. Yeah, so you're just given the model, it takes in the instruction, and so as I mentioned, there's two options. Either they pass in the input or they pass in the output, and then it kind of generates the corresponding counterpart. And this is kind of how it is set up to generate the instruction data. And then they have the automatic instruction data generation pipeline. Essentially, this is just what we covered in the diagram. Pipeline for generating the instruction data consists of 4 steps. Instruction generation, identifying whether the instruction represents a classification task. They use the input first or output first approach and then filter out low quality data, which is just data that has high overlap with the input instruction.
So one
How
more
do they
thing.
measure overlap?
How do they what?
How do they measure overlap?
The Rouge score. So Rouge is essentially a metric that is, especially Rouge L, I think it just measures overall word.
So I had a question on like how do they ensure let's say the generated samples are correct or not? So do they like filter out based on perplexity or like yeah? So this has nothing to do with maybe overlaps, but in general the data quality that is emitted.
Honestly, in their filtering and post-processing, they just say to encourage diversity, a new instruction is added to the task pool only with the Rouge L less than 0.7. And I guess they also say that they also exclude instructions that contain specific keywords that cannot be processed by language models. And that's actually about it. They don't mention there's I guess they don't do anything else. Yeah.
I see, I see. And is there any specific reason on why they restricted to classification tasks? Because I think you
No,
mentioned
they don't restrict it to classification. So they do both classification and generation. It's just that for classification, they kind of flip the ordering. So I think the rationale behind that is they don't want it to just learn how to do classification, right? Because they want to actually train it on generation, right? So if you, so for example, if it's a classification task, all it would have to do is if the instruction was like classify this, and then you're given a sentence and the output is just a classification, like a word. Instead of doing that, what they want to actually have it generate an example, right? So I think what you could see in this example in the diagram is what they want to do here is they provide it with the kind of the label already, and then it wants it to generate something that would have given you that label. Does that make sense? So they're just kind of flipping this. So in the instruction data, instead of the model takes the instruction and the input, that's taking the instruction and the label and then generating the input that would have generated that label.
Yeah. So it is just more of to do with the settings that they want to treat more as a generative problem rather than discriminative problem.
Yeah, I like they don't go super deep into like why, but I mean I think that that's what would make most sense to me. And it seems to make sense, right? Because they wanted to learn that.
I think yeah, that makes sense.
To add to that, Jay, they are not basically checking the quality of the results because they are confident that whatever these GPT or underlying large language models are, they'll be giving good generation quality. Their task is to create a diverse set of instructions that can, train the agent in being able to handle these conversational questions. And to add further, they like at each instruction that they're generating, first they will give it an example of 7 or 8 similar use cases to give it a few short setting, and then they will just ask a question, and I think it predicts the answer and the relevant what was the third thing I'm forgetting, the class label, the class label and the input. I guess they're both predicting that. Is that right, Ashwarya?
So it's given, the model is given the instruction and either the label or input, and it predicts that the one that's missing essentially.
Okay.
So yeah, as you can see here, right? It's given, the model is given the instruction and this label, right? And then they wanted to generate whatever would have created that label, or in the input first, which is like non-classification tasks, it's actually kind of normal, right? So you give me a quote from a famous person, they'll give you the topic, you generate the quote. It's just that when they do classification, I think instead of training it to be a classifier, they instead give you the label already, and then based on that, you generate the statement that would have created that label.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, like I think that's the format here, right? So each task has one or more input-output instances, and then the model is given that and is expected to produce the alternate.
And also one more thing. So in this case, like let's say, can you go back to the diagram, like the figure? Yeah. So I think they also, let's say after filtering, they include it into the pool of tasks. So do they use it like tasks which are already, let's say, generated or augmented tasks, like to again generate task, or like they just restrict that to seed data only, like when generating data from GPT?
Yeah, I think they pass it back in because they generate multiple examples from every task. So it seems like they pass it back. Cool. Yeah, so the instruction generation, they initiate the task with one instruction and one instance for each task written by human. For each step, sample 8 task instructions from the pool as in-context examples. Of the 8 instructions, 6 are from human-written tasks and 2 are from the model. And then for the classification task identification, they just have a vanilla GPT-3 to figure out if it's a classification model or not. One thing that they don't provide here, or at least I didn't see what their actual prompt is to tell the model to generate similar instruction instance output pairs given this data. Like they talk about having this and like what the inputs and outputs are, but there has to have been an actual prompt that they use to tell the model to come up with this stuff. I don't remember seeing that in the paper. Maybe it's in their code base, but
Yeah, they share the seed tasks like 175. There's a file there in the code base.
there's a file in the code base. Okay. Yeah. I don't remember it in the paper, but maybe it's included somewhere else. Yeah, so it uses 2 approaches to sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying the prompt is also there in the code base.
In the code, okay. Cool. Do you guys know what it is if you remember?
The prompt is like, given this instruction, create an input and the response. It's something like that. And based on the 8 previous, whatever shortlisted C tasks they have, that will be the context. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so pretty straightforward, I guess. Nothing fancy. Cool. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, they kind of use two different approaches to generate this for each instruction. The input first asks the LM to come up with input fields first based on the instruction and then produce the corresponding output. Includes in-context samples from examples from other tasks. And then the output first approach, first generate the possible class labels, then condition the input generation on each class label. Filtering new instructions are added with the Rouge L overlap with existing instructions. Yeah, if the Rouge L overlap with existing instructions less than 7, then they add it back in. So just a little bit of the data set that they generated. It's over 52,000 instructions and more than 82K instances corresponding to these instructions after filtering. So yeah, 52K classification, 1140. 82,000 of actual examples per all of the instructions. Yeah, just some basic data.
One quick question. Is that 82K per instruction or is that overall?
Overall, yeah.
Okay.
I think maybe some instruction may have more than one pair of input output. Some instruction just has one input output pair. So that's why 82K is a little bit more than 52K. That's what I'm thinking.
Yep. And then this is just a diagram about a little bit more about all of their data and what's generated. And then they did get human annotators to go through all of the output generations to kind of evaluate it a bit more. And you can see that, sorry. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as you can see, yeah, they just basic annotation. Does the instruction describe a valid task? Is it appropriate format? Is the output correct and acceptable? Yeah, so I don't know, it seems a bit low, but at least it seems to be generating valid instructions. Yeah. And then I think, as we said, I think one of the good things that you could use this for is like, that's actually a good question. Akash, did you think about like how to restrict this a little bit more? Like right now, it seems like it can generate instructions about close to anything. What would be a good way to, I guess maybe you can just play around with the prompt, right? If you play around the prompt saying generate instructions similar to this kind of scenario for this use case, and then use this to kind of generate a lot of training data.
Yeah, that would be one way to do it. In the original prompt, you can talk about you only create inputs for this specific field or so. So here the idea was to create a data set, which can reflect conversational settings. So removing few keywords, they just let the model flow, like the data generation process flow, and kind of, you can see, gave a good enough representation of conversational data that might be needed for training. So if you want to steer in a specific direction, the most obvious way would be to just mention in the prompt, okay, given this setting, what should you do next, instead of asking it to give, find, write, these kinds of command or instructions.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking if there's also something you could do in the filtering. Maybe you could also try to see how aligned the outputs are with your general task. But
yeah, I mean, it could be easy. We can basically query whatever the instruction is generated. We can query it with another LLM and just ask, does it cover this field or not?
yeah,
Could give the answer.
I mean, I think, yeah, agreed. Cool. Okay, so they evaluate this on a few different benchmarks. So the two main experiments are zero-shot generalization on the super natural instructions benchmark. They evaluate the model's ability to follow instructions in a zero-shot fashion. And the evaluation set of supernatural instructions consists of 119 tasks with 100 instances per task. Self-Instruct boosts the instruction following capability of GPT-3 by a large margin, which I think is to be expected. And then experiment 2, generalization to user-oriented instructions on novel tasks. Authors created a new set of instructions motivated by user-oriented applications, 252 instructions related to email writing, social media, etc. Yeah, so this is kind of, what I guess, Akash, one other options. Like, I think if the seed data is also possibly restricted, which I think is what they're doing in experiment 2, it is generating more data more relevant to those outputs.
Yeah, so in the 8 instruction that we were giving in the few short interactions, if 6 of them are related to email writing or social media, it would make sense that it would generate something along the same lines.
Yeah. And then this is more experiments, performance of GPT-3 model and its instruction tuned variants, evaluated by human experts on our 252 user-oriented instructions. Human evaluators instructed to rate the model's responses into 4 levels: correct and satisfying, acceptable, response to instruction, but it has significant errors, and irrelevant. So yeah, so this is vanilla GPT. Most responses are invalid. GPT-3 plus, as I mentioned, T0 and supernatural language are like the 2 biggest human-generated instruction following data sets. So that's these 2. And then GPT-3 Self-Instruct is what this paper is coming out with. So yeah, as you can see, it seems to be doing pretty much a decent bit better. And then Instruct GPT is obviously quite a bit better. But the main goal of this paper is like, how do we get to this without investing so much money in human annotations? And these are just some examples that the paper provided. Cool. Yeah, that's it for the paper. Pretty straightforward, but I think it's honestly pretty useful, given that, yeah. But so like after you do this, then you would actually need to go ahead and use this data set to train the vanilla language model. But I think before, a lot of the bottleneck was actually getting that data. So at least that is kind of not there. And then if you can train it efficiently using LoRa PEFT, or at least fine tune it. Do you know if there are related papers that compare performance difference on kind of doing this instruction tuning process using RLHF versus just fine tuning based on instructions? Are there papers that compare that?
One paper that came out last week, less is more aligned, Lima from Meta, which shows that.
Oh yeah. Is that on this issue?
Sorry?
Is that tackling this? Or what is, I didn't read it.
Yeah, so the overall idea of that paper is that you don't need instruction tuning. RLHF for instruction tuning or like doing all this alignment. So even like let's say with like really good quality 1,000 examples, you can like align your models very well to the output responses that you want. So I think that would be at least somewhat relevant with what you mentioned, right? Comparing standard standard fine tuning approach with the RLHF.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I guess in that scenario, based off of what we read with PEFT though, right? Like, so they used that approach and just passed it in these. Did that paper, okay, I have a few questions. The first question is, did that paper go deep into how it selected these 1,000 examples?
I think those are human curated examples, those 1,000. They shortlisted few domains and they picked examples from there. And using those 1,000 examples, they were able to train this model, which was more aligned. Basically, in few tasks, it was better when compared to which GPT-4 and Bard in some cases, and one more model I'm forgetting the name.
Lambda. It was Llama model, like, right, which was trained.
Yeah. So yeah, the whole idea is that we don't really need RLHF, wherein you need a separate model to rank the rewards. Here you can just create a data set, and using that data set you can fine tune an LLM. So just to give more context, they use this data set to train a model, and they launched it as the alpaca model, and it was good in a conversational setting, not really as great as chat gpt, but yeah,
Mhm.
it had
Yeah.
better performance.
I think it was like, as per what their numbers were, 43%, 43, and for 43% of cases, like it was probably like on par or like beating GPT. Like that was where like you can with just 100,000 examples, so it was really good. And as you maybe scale up the examples, you might get even better.
Got it. It's about alpaca was trained using RLHF though, is what I remember.
No, alpaca is,
Alpaca is a sorry, go on.
yeah, so alpaca is basically the whatever data set they created, right? They took a llama model and fine-tuned on it in a
Oh, okay. So
generative method. There's simple plain fine-tuning, that's it.
It's the
got
vanilla
it.
for acronym, but the data wasn't rated, I think, using GPT 3.5. That's the case.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So that means it's not like if you say, let's say you generate a data set here, right? Setting up a fine-tuning pipeline on like a model with, I guess QLoRa now he says you can do it on your own laptop, right? Or it's much better performance.
I think there is a paper which is last, or I think Hugging Face now enables it to just do it on a collab now.
Nice.
Until last week, it was not possible, but now it is. So before that, you needed somewhere around 24 GB of GPU memory, but now you can just do it on a collab.
Beautiful. So this seems like a very, I don't know, something you could probably do in a day, right? Run. I looked at this repo, it looks pretty easy to run. Generate some data on like a very specific type of tasks and then just tune it on a Colab notebook and get like, very high quality conversational data.
Yep, exactly.
So before it was possible on collab, we were trying to do it on a 810 GPU with 1,000 examples, and it took around 50 minutes to do it even then. So I think now it should be much faster.
Oh, nice. Have you done that? Have you tried it?
Yeah, we tried it for some specific tasks. So, for example, detecting whether the topic in a conversation has changed, or what are the entities, and it takes very few examples. Even 100 good examples very are just enough to train to get a very
One
good
question
performance for
though.
a
So
single
like
task.
I guess my question there is like, was the model doing bad to begin with? Like, what's the workflow you guys were using? Was it you had a whatever? Were you using the out of like a vanilla, or what model were you using before? And did you like identify where it's doing poorly and then create a data set for that and then solve it, or?
Yeah, so we had a CRF model identifying named entities earlier, and we tried
Yeah,
the
what's
Llama
your
model. Named entity task with we were doing it with a CRF model, and we just thought of trying Llama model without any fine tuning. It doesn't work, and if we just take 100 examples and fine tune it, it works better than the CRF model.
Wait, CRF, that's not even like a deep learning model, right?
It's a BERT based CRF, so
Okay, got it.
mix of both. Yeah.
I see.
Yes. Pavan, there's conditional random field.
I see. So you're using that to detect named entities in your text?
Yes.
I see. Wait, so actually why, but obviously I'm pretty sure there's a lot of can't just a vanilla GPT model do that for you? Why do you need to?
Probably yes. Just not just the vanilla, but some fine tuning is required. We just did it on Llama.
Because that's
So,
not even a conversation, right? That seems like a very simple task, right? Why do you need a conversational agent to be able to?
I think it's more like the three models are better known when let's say you have a few shot setting, right? At least the capabilities are much better, and I think that's where they stand out more than the like zero shot movie. But yeah.
For our task, most of the named entities fail when the model doesn't know about the entity. And in case of Llama, it almost knows every entity. So that is one thing working for it.
and how did you train those 100 examples? Were it like all in a single prompt or separate?
Same prompt, same output, JSON output, and it even outputs JSON every time, unlike ChatGPT.
Would
Okay,
you
so
want to present or do you want to share? I'm curious how you set that up. Is it just like a training data set, or did you?
So it's a work-related thing. I'm not sure if I can present.
Got it,
I can
got
give
it.
some examples.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, interesting.
but it's like you're sending those example one by one, right? Not entire the thing, entire 100 examples at the same time to fine tune it.
I think it should be batched. I will have to look it up again.
Oh, okay, sure.
No, I guess is your question like, are you just doing it like in context versus actually tuning it? Is that what you're asking?
Oh no, it's not in context. We are fine tuning it.
Got it. Interesting. Cool. Nice. So you used this to generate data, right? You're saying, and then you fine tune the llama on that.
No, we handpick the data instead of generating. We did try to go through the generative route, but it's just if examples are only 100, it's better to just pick diverse examples on our own, handpicked examples.
So you guys found the Lima foundings earlier than them.
Yeah, but Lima is talking about a diverse enough data set that you need creating a diverse enough data set to do diverse enough tasks. Our task is just one task and one output that we expect.
Yeah, I guess my like it's neat that you tried it, but I feel like you could have possibly achieved this with like a simpler setup almost.
Probably, yes.
Because I think like at least named entity recognition is a very very, as you said,
The entities that we are looking for are very different from most of the entity recognition model that exists. So very niche entities in a niche domain of ITSM. So
got it. See.
Llama worked because of its pre-training and the amount of data it has seen. That's why as an LLM it worked. Whereas a T5 might have not worked that much.
Yeah, T5 we had tried T5. It did not work that good. I mean, CRF model was better than that.
Even T5 double models.
We tried a T5 smaller one as far as I remember.
But I think this was prominently due to, I think, as I mentioned, right, data. Because I think Llama was trained on 1 trillion tokens, right? So at least
Yeah.
that's where the ability stems from.
Nice. We should pick some problem and implement all this. How about next week? I'll look into Jay. You can present the paper for QLOR, and I'll pick some examples, and then we'll see the code also.
Yep, that sounds good, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Has anyone tried it for the inferencing? How expensive is it inferencing, or how cheap is it possible to run an inferencing job on this?
For Llama,
Yes.
I mean, it depends. I've not tried it, but I'm just assuming it will depend. If you can get the inference in under 12 GB GPU, which I think it is possible with loading in 8-bit, then you'll have to pay for that 12 GB GPU only, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure inference is never the bottleneck, right? Because that generally at that point you're not. Yeah, I've been able to do inference for a lot of these models even on CPUs.
Yeah,
So I don't think inferences shouldn't be an issue.
yeah, but I think only when you put it to 8-bit, maybe you lose out on some deterministic characteristics, right? Because in the uh, decoding might not always be deterministic in this case, right? When you load it at 8-bit, we'll have some like variance, right, in generation.
Not sure. Might be something to try out. Yeah. Cool. So I think that's it for this one. Maybe next week, QLARA, is the Lima paper pretty also fairly short? I'd imagine if it's conceptually just choosing samples and seeing how well we can, might be a good one to also follow up with.
Yeah, but I think if Prakash is gonna cover the code, then I don't think we'll be able to cover Lima as well, right?
Okay, so we're committed to actually getting through.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I can help too. So what exactly is the task we're committing to? Just generating a data set through Self-Instruct and then trying to actually just fine tune it using QLARA?
so not sure exactly, but maybe like present some toy example, right now, like that we can try at least in like the group, and then we can probably like try out some more better, let's say, examples as you mentioned, right? Like fine tune based on like the self-instruct data that is out there, and put out some models or like notebooks. So I think that would be something we I think had initially also discussed with, but I didn't pick up. So yeah, we can do something around those lines as well, right? Like,
Yeah,
we-
yeah, we can do that. That sounds reasonable. Yeah, I think given a specific type of conversational task, see if this is good at handling that.
Sure, I think let's see. So maybe Akash and we can discuss and like probably update you as well, like on that.
Yeah, I can help too. I want to set this up for something specific, so
Sure.
yeah,
Okay.
we can work together.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that sounds like the natural next thing to cover.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
for maybe next week we can cover Lima. So maybe that would be interesting.
Yeah, sounds good.
So what are we doing next week? Are we solving something or just
Next
covering
week,
QLARA?
I think the idea was Jay will present the QLARA paper, and then Akash, if you want, I can work with you on trying to get up a framework for generating a sample data set using self-instruct, and then fine-tuning the QLARA model on that, or using QLARA to fine-tune a vanilla model on
We can
this.
always, you can look into, generate using self-instruct to create a data set for a specific thing, and I'll look into how you can train these or fine-tune these models and set the code up. Then when we meet next week, we'll have all the three things necessary, and we can just give it a go.
Got it. Yeah, I think QLARA, they already have a notebook for it, so it might be as simple as running through that. But yeah, you can. Yeah, this
Okay.
is the one that they link in their.
No, I'll probably run it for some Llama variant or so that it's running. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, they. So I'm just going through what they have. So this is, we can cover this, I guess, next week. But
Because they do also cover maybe 33 billion parameter model as well, right? I think now.
yeah, so it says that they are taking in 13 billion parameter. Yeah, they have it works free with GPUs for 7 and 13 billion parameter models. And then they have a demo for their 33 billion parameter model. But yeah, it looks like they're using PEFT, and then yeah, maybe some explanation of exactly how the what's going on in the GitHub repo would also be good.
Sure, I think maybe we
But
can.
this seems like it should be pretty straightforward to run. Yeah, well, we need to figure out kind of where the data set is plugging into it for kind of tuning it on your own data. Cool. Okay, so I think we have what we want to do for next week. Anything else you guys want to cover?
I have a quick question about the self-instruct paper, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm just curious, is there any problem with generating a data set from a model and then fine-tuning on that same data set? It just seems like it would push you towards overfitting more or something conceptual like that. Just a bigger picture sort of thing.
So I mean the thing is that they're kind of different tasks, right? So and you also don't need don't need to fine tune the same model, right? This data set is kind of model agnostic at the end of the day. So it's almost, I think, a good parallel would be like I am using the model to they're like completely different tasks, right? So if you were trying to get the model to, like, you can't use a language model to teach it how to generate text better, right? Like if you're trying to say, I'm going to use this model to like complete text, right? Like do natural like text completion, and then you just pass in that generated text completion back to the model to do more text completion. I feel like that, yeah, kind of runs into the issue you're describing, in the sense that it's not going to get any better by just using its own outputs on that same task. But here it's kind of creating a completely separate data set, right? And this data set is like a set of instructions for it to so it's not the same task. So I don't think it actually runs into that kind of an issue.
I think it also probably depends, or at least assumption is that your base model from where you are generating the data, right? It's pretty good enough and like has been trained on like much more diverse corpora, which I think that's true in case of GPT. Yeah, if your model like base model itself is trained on very limited corpora, then there's a risk of overfitting, right? Because it is more bound to generate from like nearly the same thing, right? But in this case, since the GPT-3 has been trained on like much more like bigger corpora and diverse corpora, we'll get more diverse examples, right? So there would be not very high risk of overfitting.
Yeah. And to add further, you can think of it like if you were using GPT-3 to get this data set, now with this data set, you can create something like ChatGPT, because in a conversational setting, it will be able to solve these tasks. If that makes it clear, a bit clearer for you. So you can use these data set and fine tune any Llama or such language models to make them good in a conversational setting and be able to solve different types of tasks.
So also, Ashway, like, did they mention about the like costs that they had basically when generating this amount of data? Because I think it would be interesting, like how much did it like cost like for this?
How much cost? No, but
I think I remember it saying it's they spent either total $500 or $600 on this, out of which either it was $400 on generating the data set and $100 on fine tuning, or it was $400. I am not sure the breakup, but yeah, it's total cost of fine generating these example and fine tuning a language model, fine tuning a Llama model was around $500 to $600.
So it's pretty cheap, I would say, compared to like training something from scratch.
Yeah. And good things like Ashutosh just mentioned, right? You can use it to fine tune for very specific examples and get very good performance.
And they in the Lima paper they were fine tuning all the layers or updating all the layers. And you can also get away with something like adapters and just fine tuning for one layer.
I think that's more probably like a choice, right? But I think yeah, usually yeah, like manual fine tuning is this.
Yeah, that was very useful context. Thanks very much for highlighting all those points. I appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. It'll also be better, honestly, just to try it out, and that's probably the best way to get a kind of a good sense of how it works. So hopefully we have that for next week, and then yeah, we can also cover the Q-Laura paper. But yeah, it's actually insane how every week so many things change. So maybe next week there'll be even more cool things to talk about.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's it for now. See you all next week.
Thanks very much. Great presentation. See you next week. Happy
Thank you.
Memorial Day.
You too. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.